I call the Transportation Commission meeting to order. We'll run real quick. Commission members, Brendan Cruikshank. Justin Denardi.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Present. Matt Echo.
Present. Hi, everybody.
John Hansen. Bob.
Good afternoon. How you doing?
Yourself. And Josh Stone.
Present.
Do we have Lieutenant Hurley? I think you're muted. I don't see him, but yeah, you're here. And then who else do we have from the city that's present?
We have Councilmember McCarthy.
Hey, council member.
I can run through the city transportation lineup real quick.
Sure.
Yeah, looks like Martin is here, Chris Fair is here, Sydney, our intern, is here, and Reed is here. Stephanie and David are busy and won't be attending.
We also have a hell of an echo going on.
Is that me?
Yeah, Chair, I think it's somehow getting picked up on your end for the microphone. The echo, that is.
Does that seem to be any better? Excellent. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Now is the opportunity for public comment. At this time, any member of the public may address the commission on any subject within the commission's jurisdiction that is not on this meeting's agenda. The Arizona Open Meeting Law prohibits the commission from discussing or taking action on any item that is not listed on the prepared agenda. Commissioners may, however, respond to criticism made by those addressing the commission, ask staff to review a matter, or ask that a matter be placed on a future agenda. To address the commission item that is on the agenda, please wait for the chair to call for public comment at the time the item is heard. Is there any public comment out there? You can make a comment or come off mute and say something. Seeing no public comment, we can roll into the approval of minutes. Is there any member of the commission that wishes to have comments on this or wishes to propose a motion to approve the minutes?
Chair, if there are no comments, I would like to propose a motion to approve the minutes.
I'm hearing no comments, so do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second that, Bob.
Thanks, Bob and Matt. Our minutes are approved. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, new business, the land availability and suitability study.
Thank you. We have a presentation tonight from the planning division at the city of Flagstaff. I see Michelle McNulty, Tiffany Antala both joined in. I'm not quite sure who's going to jump into this presentation, but they are going to take it away when they're ready.
And is it okay if I just share my screen?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Oh. Okay, you guys are getting the benefit of us having done this twice now. And so we've been able to streamline a few of the slides. I'm Michelle McNulty, I'm the planning director. Tiffany, do you want to introduce yourself while I'm putting this in present mode?
Sure, I'm Tiffany Antal. I'm the zoning code manager, and I am Michelle's happy helper.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think if I go to slide master, oh, no. Sorry, y'all. I am gonna just,
Do you want me to just keep talking while you?
yes. And if you wanna, I don't know why everything is so different. I don't know where I don't have just a present mode.
It's a brand new Teams. Welcome.
Oh my. Okay, all. I'm really apologizing for this. I think it's a reading view. Okay. Thank you. Okay, this is the last CAP presentation, or as we are calling it, the Land Availability and Suitability Study and Code Analysis Project. This is a multi-pronged initiative to address critical long-term planning and resilience needs. And it's a partnership between various different sections of the city, sections and divisions, primarily both financially and from a workload standpoint. It's a partnership between planning, housing, sustainability, and Mountain Line. But it's being highly coordinated with a lot of different divisions at the city, including engineering, specifically with development engineering and transportation, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to come to this board. Also fire, building safety, economic vitality, water services, and it's not written down, but I have to say PROS, or Parks and Rec and Open Space and Events. And this is a really important project because it's providing a much needed base for high level coordination between numerous city divisions. So
Hey, Michelle, we can't see the presentation.
You can't. Can you just see my, okay.
Yep, just your desktop.
And I had just gotten it all dialed in. Now I can see it. You can see how messy my desktop is. Now can you see the presentation, not my desk? Okay. Yay, okay. So the project scope, it's a two-part project that's being done concurrently. The first part is the last, or the land availability suitability. And because we have limited land left in Flagstaff, we really need to understand what is available in the terms of development. And that just means, it doesn't mean that it's available because it's for sale, or it just means that it's available and that it's either vacant or it's underdeveloped. And underdeveloped means 10%, the development on the site is 10% of the cost of the actual land. And trying to understand what are the development potentials and what are the barriers. And then the second part is the code analysis, or the CAP. And it's an in-depth development code and process analysis through the lens of the City Council's commitments to address housing and climate. And I want to be really clear, it's not just to identify what's not working. We know there's a lot of things in our code that works well, and we don't want to lose that. So it's looking at what's working and what is not, what could be improved. So from the land availability suitability standpoint, we looked at an area a little outside of just our city boundary. So the gray shaded area is Flagstaff city boundary. The red area is the project boundary. And then we have, with the yellow and red hatch, is the urban growth boundary. We looked outside of the city boundary because those are corridors that are still in our planning area under the regional plan, and they're where we have rural activity centers. So we wanted to identify, look at those areas to see if there was some potential that would also advise us if we needed to expand our urban growth boundaries. Because we have a very progressive code, residential is allowed in almost every single zoning district. whether it's as a mixed use or just a primary use. So we looked at almost all of our land use categories and zoning districts. There were some lands that we didn't look at, like Forest Service or the National Forest Service, and public open space, school sites, and other select publicly owned lands that we knew would not, that had land deeds on them that wouldn't allow for housing. Again, we looked at what was vacant and underutilized, with vacant just being that there's no development, underutilized that 10% or less of the improvement of the area to its underlying property value. We did a second screening after kind of compiling all those and just remove things that we knew didn't count as land, like condo building parcels. They'll just show up as one big parcel and have various weird things with their property value, and then narrow strips along right-of-ways that aren't really developable. And then we did an environmental screening that looked at the environmental constraints that we regulate through code. So that includes our wetlands, stream buffers, slopes over 25%, the 100-year floodplain, and that helped us understand what is constrained or not really buildable versus unconstrained, which means more buildable. Here's a general map of kind of where we found. This is the general inventory of what was vacant, so that's in the green. Underutilized parcels are in the purple, and then we showed the environmental constraints in the gray. We will be sending out a link after this presentation to the full reports, and you'll be able to get into the maps in a lot more detail in that. So just some general conclusions. We have about 8,125 acres of vacant land, of which about 67,000 acres are residentially zoned. And then we have about 5,400 acres of underutilized land. About 13% of the vacant land is constrained with environmental constraints. One of the things that we did not consider is we also regulate tree resources. So residential development under the residential zoning is required to save 50% of the existing trees under the resource protection overlay. And so that's a lot harder to do. So we did not calculate for that. So that 13% could be further constrained when you include that tree count. Which leaves us with about 7,000 square acres of vacant buildable land and about 48,000 of underutilized. Okay. The most common environmental flood constraints are steep slopes and floodplains. Anybody that lives in Flagstaff really won't be surprised by that. And one of with the Rio de flood control project, though, that could actually remove some of those constraints of land that are in the floodplain. So that's a really important project for our community. Within the bigger inventory, we drilled it down to about 50 opportunity sites. Opportunity sites just mean that they have a certain level of readiness that they could be developed. So it might be development projects or infrastructure that's going on in the vicinity. It could be that they have the right zoning with infrastructure coming to the project site. And so that's kind of how we drilled down those a little bit more specifically. And then the second map shows the sites that's in the big map. You see it says see downtown detail. The map to the right just shows kind of those parcels within the downtown area that were identified as potential opportunity sites. So kind of the challenges overall on the opportunity sites is that a majority of our land needs to be rezoned. So a lot of the land that was identified for being available is in our lowest density zoning district, which is RR or rural residential, and ER, estate residential. Those are both limited to 1 unit, 1 dwelling per acre. So that's a really low density, and it has missing infrastructure. In the downtown, some of the challenges are we have aging infrastructure, the floodplain and drainage, proximity to railroad noise, and that has to do more with HUD funding, and just in order to apply for certain funding types, you would have to add a lot of mitigation to reduce the sound, which can add cost, and then parking and access. So just some of the general conclusions to the opportunity sites. Basically, a lot of our larger sites generally lack infrastructure access. So for instance, we have a lot of acreage out along where the JWP corridor extension is going to go, but until that road is built, that's a hard project or hard place to really see a lot of development because it lacks the infrastructure, even though you have all that land. And a lot of this is going to play into the code analysis part we're going to talk about next. Just some of the things that came out of that is that a lot of the high opportunity sites don't have really high levels of infrastructure. So they still may, sorry. Well, I'm going to skip that slide. Sorry. So really, how is this going to be used? So this is going to inform the regional plan update. So right now, we're looking at different scenarios of where we want to see growth and development in the future. The last is being compared against where the community is saying they want to see growth, and we're actually finding that where we've identified the opportunity sites, they're actually very aligned with where the community would like to see growth outside of our infill or where we redevelop. It will also help inform land use designations and other changes that could positively impact housing yield while moving us closer to our sustainability goals. The land availability suitability, or LAS, is also informing the code analysis by informing recommended zoning code or development review process changes that impact the density allowed in different zoning districts, or when we require water sewer impact analysis, or a WISA, or a traffic impact analysis, TIA. And really what's important about this is it's allowing us to recommend code changes that are right-sized for Flagstaff and not just going off of what the national norms are, so that we can make sure that the code changes we make appropriately address the barriers that we have to our land. Some of the, just some overall observations are that smaller sites are not going to probably trigger the water sewer impact analysis. And they might not apply if existing infrastructure appears, but any larger development is going to require that analysis. And typically the same is going to be true with our traffic impact analyses. And there's a perception in the community that these can be very lengthy and expensive processes, and they are not predictable outcomes, which can add to the risk and then of developing. So just something we need to consider as we look at, how do we improve processes? And then some of the largest sites, again, they're going to have to be rezoned. And so that tells us that we have to start looking at our zoning amendment process. Just a few other things. It's going to help us understand where we see specific locations where we have housing opportunities, and then again, informing those code changes. It also underscores the importance of looking at parking strategies such as traffic demand management to promote residential density, especially as we talk about infill or redevelopment in our downtown that is lacking parking. And when we say parking or traffic demand management, it's looking at other modes of transportation to get people around town so they're less car reliant, and also other reductions with like non-transportation trail system so that people are less car reliant, so that we don't have to require so much parking on a site. It's also important just to note that the last review is a snapshot in time, and it's really looking at what we regulate today We recognize that there is a lot of community conversation around fire and post-fire flooding in the 500-year floodplain, and that could affect some of the findings to this in the future. But right now, we are really looking at what we regulate today. And then another possible outcome is that this could inform our capital improvement plan and really underscores the importance of the regional plan and the CIP really working together. So I'm going to pause there before I go into the code analysis project and just see if anyone has any questions and I can't see the chat. Okay, I'm going to move on. So the code analysis project, so the reason why we're doing this is we have a lot of plans and policies in place that call for really bold and urgent action. And the graphic ahead is kind of what we think we want to get, what we're trying to get out of those policies and plans. But we have codes that have been written at different times under different contexts, and they're not exactly performing as an effective tool to implement today's plans and policies. And they might be actually prioritizing other goals from another time. And so they're working against us trying to achieve some of our housing and climate goals. The code analysis project is going to be a 3-part process. Right now, we are just at the diagnosis. And it's really to help identify and evaluate barriers, opportunities, and conflicts. And I really want to be clear that when we're saying barriers, we don't mean that as a negative. We see that as where we see opportunities that we can align our codes to help get our goals met. We will also be developing concepts and approaches for code and process changes, as well as specific code changes. And we'll be coming back to different commissions, such as yourself and the City Council, as we finish those steps. But right now, we're just at the diagnostic. So the code analysis plan, it really looked at, first and foremost, our Flagstaff regional plan, and then within that, there's the 10-year housing plan, high occupancy housing specific plan, our Flagstaff in Motion, which is Mountain Lines plan, the active transportation master plan, and our carbon neutrality plan. And the consultants really try to distill down the key outcomes that are in these plans that are impacted by codes. And then they did a whole scan of all of our development codes. So building regulations, fire, public ways and property, zoning code, including both our affordable housing and our residential sustainable building incentives, our general plans and subdivision code, engineering design standards, as well as our development review process, and then looking at also technical manuals that say how we should do our transportation impact analysis. We also have a policy for affordable housing, and then the Mountain Line design guidelines for transit facilities. They also took a lot of time to meet with city staff to understand what city staff experiences as being conflicts in our codes and in our processes, as well as talking to the people who use these codes, so local developers, engineers, architects, and getting their perspective of what they see as potential barriers to bringing on affordable or even just a more diverse type of housing, as well as sustainable residential development in the city. They also looked at a few actual cases so that they could understand from real life experience what worked, again, and then also where we could have gotten a different outcome with different changes to our codes. So some of the key findings, again, going back to the last, so a lot of our buildable lands, are located on the outskirts of town. And when I say that, where there's not infrastructure readily available, and they're in that lower zoning district, which means lower density zoning district, which means they're likely going to have to come in for a rezone in order to develop at a higher density. So that tells us we really need to look at our rezoning process and our subdivision processes, because a lot of those lands have not been subdivided, so that they can keep pace with our needs. And then when those rezonings occur, that's when we really have the opportunity to work with a developer to ask for more than what code allows in order to, within a proportionality, to help meet our housing and climate goals. We've also considered displacement, and so we wanted to understand what are the neighborhoods that are experiencing displacement right now and where are they in the stages, so that we can better understand, again, code changes and how they would impact these populations, and also understand how widespread it is. And as you can see, we have significant neighborhoods that are experiencing this, and so one of the biggest ways to prevent displacement is actually producing more housing. So when you have housing scarcity, that's when you do see higher rates of displacement. And so we need new housing supply in both the neighborhoods that are experiencing displacement, which also are neighborhoods that tend to have the zoning for higher density, but as well, we need new development in areas outside of those neighborhoods. So again, some citywide issues of barriers and issues are zoning map subdivision process, looking at those incentives for affordable housing and sustainable building design, our resource protection, which we're really finding is not optimized to balance the housing production goals with our environmental goals. We really need to look at how do we reduce our parking requirements. That is also a very critical barrier to housing affordability and development feasibility, as well as it's not in alignment with our climate goals for higher density and housing in transit served areas. And then our high occupancy housing, which requires, in most cases, a conditional use permit. Some of the specific zones we need to look at are, in addition to that, are R1 and R1N, which are low density zoning districts, and our medium density, or MR, medium residential density, and our commercial zones, which allow for a higher density. So just some of the issues with our process that have been identified by our consultant team and from providing feedback, getting feedback from the different folks that I've mentioned, is that we do, development agreement is often occurs with a rezone, and that can limit the flexibility of a property. And then it also encourages negotiations to address citywide needs that sometimes can't be effectively addressed on an on-site basis. But what we do get out of those that are really important, those DAs, is the ability to negotiate with the, or not really negotiate, it's when the developer does their traffic impact analysis and their water sewer analysis. That's where we document the cost of those off-site improvements that are going to be required. So, and that's a good thing. And then the concept plat phase of subdivision process adds a necessary cost and delay at the beginning of the process. So that's something we need to look at from a process standpoint of how do we streamline that. As well as eventually we probably need to look at our subdivision standards to talk more about transportation, but that will needs and connectivity, but that will likely be at the next phase of this project. And then just the idea that city council approval in all subdivision adds just unnecessary uncertainty, cost, and delay. So just a quick overview. I won't get too much in the weeds on the single family zoning district, but in the code, the max density is 6. But what we're finding is that people are only able to achieve about a 4.7. So we need to understand what barriers are within that zoning district that are limiting us to even get the max density. And this is inconsistent with our city's climate goals when we know that to get transit supportive density, we need about 8 to 15 units per acre. And so in a lot of the R1 is in that area that is kind of near those vulnerable neighborhoods. So we really need to understand how do we start to get a higher density so that we can support transit serving those neighborhoods. This just goes into missing middle housing being kind of that cost in between what is affordable and then those really high-end houses. And we're really, we have a lot of barriers to getting that missing middle price point. And then it's just, and again, it's kind of constraining our overall housing supply and worsening our affordability issues. And then looking at our commercial zones, again, these are most suitable for high density housing, but in some ways the code makes it challenging to build housing in these zones. And so specifically because of the requirement for a conditional use permit. So we need to look at how we can potentially reduce that barrier. Again, another citywide issue is just minimum parking requirements. This is a barrier to providing our housing and our climate goals, but we do need to look at other ways in which we can get people out of their cars to stop making it so reliant on a site-by-site instance. Housing and the affordable housing incentives, we really found that the benefit doesn't really get a return of investment. So there's really not the financial incentive for a developer to take our affordable housing incentives. So we need to look at that and understand how do we start to improve the value on taking those incentives so that people start to bring affordable housing to their projects, even on their by right. And by right, that just means with their current zoning, so that they don't have to rely always on, so that we as a city don't have to rely on only being able to get affordable housing from developments that are going through the rezone process. Very similar is true for the sustainable building incentives, but some features that could be required, and then others really kind of lack that compelling incentives. And then there's just the whole conversation about, in order to really become carbon neutral, that we really need to decarbon the grid system. So it's a big conversation. And then just making sure that as we address the barriers, that we are reconciling tensions with city's other goals and policies. We don't want to lose sight of our other, community character, historic preservation, making sure that we have sufficient infrastructure. Again, parking management, resource protection, and then bringing the public along with us as we make changes to not just our regional plan, but to the future codes that could be recommended to come out of this project. So some of the key findings, just example from stakeholder comments. Again, there's elements of the water sewer impact analysis and TIA or traffic impact analysis that can be barriers to development. So really kind of this project will look at how do we start to streamline these processes or bring more predictability to them. There's also a desire from our development community, and I think a lot of people in the community to have maybe allow narrow streets and alternative sidewalks and planner design strips. Obviously, we don't want to put that over safety, so we want to make sure that we're still meeting the needs of fire and our maintenance folks. But just kind of is there maybe some opportunities to provide modifications or other types of ways of looking at how we do our road design. Again, the water sewer impact analysis is required for most developments. It's a necessary impact analysis, but looking at how it could be streamlined and more predictable. And then the transportation access code issues, which is pretty important to this group, is our street cross sections are seen as wide, complex, and prescriptive. Our winter parking ordinance really restricts our ability to allow off-site site parking or other known as on-street parking to be used for development, because about 5 months out of the year you can't park on them on our streets. So for winter maintenance, cul-de-sacs are typically very wide and generally create an inefficient development pattern. Our setbacks on alleys conflicts with the benefit of having an alley by promoting the building forward, pedestrian oriented, but our setbacks are wider than needed, but they're not wide enough to accommodate parking. Driveway standards may need more flexibility and options for reduced standards for smaller multifamily developments, so that 3 to 4 unit. And then parkways, they're wonderful and they're a very big attribute to our community, but the cost developments are high and they require significant space and expense. So how do we better balance that with the contribution to higher housing cost, lower density development, and the use of scarce water resources? So just again, engineering standards are seen as contributing to lower density development that uses land inefficiently. I do know that there's been a few engineering standards that have been brought forward that I think start to really chip away at some of this. But then just seeing that connection between those standards and how they reduce the residential development from a density standpoint and efficiency is really important. Kind of, again, I feel like I'm picking on the TIA, but this is just what we hear as being potential issues and concerns from developers, but that they can be subjective, that and that can have a major impact on a development schedule and cost, and that it could actually result in developers decreasing the numbers so that they don't have to do such a large study, and that costs us more housing because they're not bringing the bigger project forward. Transit and active modes requirements and mitigation may also be subjective and difficult to predict, and this can negatively impact housing production and affordability. And so really these requirements should be more clarified to help better promote improved transit and active mode networks. Again, just the unpredictability nature of mitigations, and again, developers choosing to avoid a higher density development or cut back on units so they don't trigger certain requirements. So one thing we could also look at is a standard impact fee, which I know is something we as a city we look at every 5 years, which could help there's still the development cost that development is paying for these offsite improvements, but it is a little more predictable and standard. And I know we're working on ways to help set the framework to providing a more standardized process. Some issues with the fire code, kind of going back to the engineering standards as well, because they're very intertwined, but just fire access lane width. They currently exceed IFC, International Fire Code, with a somewhat one-size-fits-all approach, which creates challenges for some types of development. And then again, that usually decreases the density and increasing housing costs. And then this is just the different, requires the water supply for fire protection, which requires an 8-inch water main. But many times on the urban fringes, there's only a 6-inch main. So people know they're going to have to increase that water line, which can be a cost, and then you don't know what you're getting into when you start to dig into those things. So really, building code, again, it's not really the building codes that add to the cost, but it's actually the labor, supply chain, and higher financing costs that we're experiencing right now. And that does have an impact on our affordable housing. Adaptive reuse can be very complex and variable, and again, hard to predict. Our developers and development community really need that predictability so that they can make their cost model work. We also, with sustainability, there's a misalignment between stakeholders and city goals, and it's a perception by the development community that it's nice to have, but expensive. And that's something that we've talked about a lot, we need to help educate our design community to understand that it might not be as expensive as they think it is, or even more expensive at all. With carbon neutrality, we really need to elevate our building performance beyond code through both energy and water efficiency. And then again, that really we need to start looking in, as globally as or nationally as grid decarbonization to be really carbon neutral. And then again, city housing and sustainability incentives are just not enticing enough to overcome the financial barriers. And this might require using a suite of local, state, and federal utility incentives. So how is this all going to be used? Again, we're going to be informing the regional plan. We're going to be informing the rest of this. The last will be informing the rest of the code analysis project. Staff will be working through this process to prioritize recommended code changes. I know engineering, again, they've been working on some prioritization code changes. We've been working with them as part of this project. And so you'll see a lot more of us coming forward with a lot more code changes throughout the next years to follow. And then processes are continually being vetted and modified as recommended through this process. And then the feedback we get from the users to understand how we can be more streamlined with our development review processes. So just some key dates. This is where, this is one stop to several different commissions that we're meeting with: sustainability, housing, planning and zoning. And then we will take this information to the city council to get their feedback. Once we get all this feedback, we will be finalizing the draft last report. And then that will pretty much be a done report, but it will continue to inform the rest of the process. And then we will also finalize the diagnostic part of the CAP, but then that will also continue to inform the rest of the project. This is just a diagram showing how the regional plan and the land availability suitability are moving together. And that is the end of my presentation. And I apologize because I was a little bit off on a few slides because I just made some cuts this afternoon, but thank you for your time. Any questions, feedback? Oh.
Thanks for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. And
oh, I was just gonna. I think the transportation impact analysis comments are interesting. I don't know, Jeff, the city staff have any plans for adjusting that, or is that on the radar at all, or not yet?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, we have a number of things kind of working on the TIA front, but the TIA itself is a kind of a big and complicated thing. The last time we updated it a number of years ago, we did it with staff time, and it took like a year and a half or something to work through. I think we're hoping to incorporate it into one of the different planning studies that we have going to try to get some consultant help with this. So I think we submitted a grant today that is a good potential to work on the TIA if we're awarded that grant. If not, again, we'll have some other ideas. But yeah, it's on our radar. There's a lot of ideas. We kind of follow a really typical process. So to get away from that is, we'd be I think we'll be creating something fairly unique, which also has its own kind of weirdnesses, because what we do now is kind of what every city in the valley does, most cities in the country. So we kind of follow a normal process. But anyways, yeah, we're going to long answer there, but yes, we have some ideas.
And I feel like that was a lot of information. We're trying to distill it each time we talk about it. But I think as we get to the next phase and we really start talking about potential solutions to some of these barriers, we'll be able to bring to this group a much more focused to your commission kind of presentation. But we wanted to make sure that we gave you all the background and kind of gave you an awareness that this was happening so that as we do come to you in the future, that you kind of know what the impetus was. And I probably should have led with that before I just gave you that whole presentation, but it's a lot, and but it won't be the last time you see us either.
Yeah, I think it's other thing that's interesting is towards the end, I think on your last slide, you had a bullet point about what contributes to housing costs. And I'm skeptical, and this is, part of my own personal biases of that decreasing some of the costs for developers will result in decreasing housing costs. Because it seems like developers don't decrease housing costs if they don't have to as it is, and they take whatever opportunity they can to make money on that. And that's what we're supposed to do, right? Like in a capitalist society. But how do we ensure that we're getting the benefit out of this for the community as a whole, I guess?
I appreciate that, because I think that that's a very fair point. And I think two things. One, very well noted, and I think that that's going to be the thing we grapple with as we do the code changes and process changes, is how do we get those assurances? And then the second is I think I overemphasized the cost savings to developers, because it's also to us as we do capital projects and to overall. But your point is well taken, and I think that is going to be something we grapple with.
Councilmember?
Well, thank you, Joe. A couple comments. Since I've been on council, this is the first time that I've seen this much detail going into, thinking about what we need to do. And I'm excited about it. I actually am. The other thing I'll mention is, the cost of housing. When I built my house, which is about 20 years ago, I upgraded all of my insulation in the walls and in the ceiling, and it only cost me a couple of $100. But I'll tell you this, my house has never been hot in the summer, because I open a window at one end of the house and put a fan at the other end. In the morning, I get up, it's cold, I close the windows, and the house stays nice all summer. And almost all of my neighbors have retrofitted their houses with refrigeration and air conditioning. So, they spent literally thousands of dollars, and I only spent a couple of $100. So it is cost effective to better insulate our homes. And just as one example. So I think sometimes people get all hung up on, well, the short-term cost is a little bit more, and ignoring that the long-term savings is very significant. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
So we'll get you scheduled, Michelle, when you are ready to do this again or have some specifics for us.
Yeah.
We'll work you into the calendar.
Okay.
Real quick, Jeff, I just want to.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, if there's no more other questions from anybody else, I want to open it to the public and see if there's any public comments on this.
I don't see any in the chat. Any requests?
Okay. I don't know who Tyler is, but he said he was logging into the presentation, so I just wanted to check. Great. Okay. Thanks. Go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
No, you're good. I was just kind of wrapping up that we'll get this scheduled as it's ready to talk about again, or talk about in more details. And I'm sure we'll have a few things based on that initial list and the discussions that have been going on today. So no, I'm just trying to wrap it up a little for you.
Can I just ask really quickly, is there anything that this commission is aware of that we, as a potential barrier from a transportation standpoint, that you would like us to look at as part of this project? And if you can also send that to Jeff if you'd like, and if you think of something after we log off.
Yeah, I guess my one question for you, Michelle, and also for Jeff, to think about is this changing the code takes a lot of time. And so like, I guess like what opportunities do we have? I know the city engineers are working on other code updates that are just to kind of like the backbone of the code to help make sure things run smoother. And so, yeah, just probably if you run across ideas or have ways that like could accelerate or could bundle code changes, it seems like, figuring out how to do this faster is important, because with all these great ideas at the current pace, it could still take 5 or 10 years to get anything done.
Tiffany, I don't know if she described herself quite as the guru she is, but she is actually the zoning code manager that is her sole job from a zoning code standpoint. And she is fiercely amazing at, like, that's her goal, is to get these changes through on a quick path, especially as it goes to the zoning. And I think she's been assisting with engineering as well if they need any help. But yeah, Joe, your point's well taken on that too. We're also trying to figure out how to make the changes quickly. And just, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but that's why we've actually broken this out into 3 different parts, is because we don't want to wait until the study's over and then start doing the work. We've actually been identifying like the low hanging fruit along the way. So in the meantime of Tiffany also co-leading this project, she's been, from a zoning standpoint, writing a lot of code changes that are just that low hanging fruit that we don't need a document to tell us we need to make that change. They're just things that staff knows from working in code. And I think that's very similar to what engineering did. They kind of established, a big list of code changes, but then really took the ones that, these are the ones we don't need this study to tell us we need to do. We just need to do these. And then we're continuing trying to kind of bite them off in little chunks like that along the way. So we feel the same way you do. And if we think of other ways, we will definitely share them. And if you guys think of any, share with us. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Ready? I'll pull the agenda back up and we'll see what's next.
All right, so next up on the agenda, concluding general business. The reports for the bicycle and pedestrian advisory, there's links. And so I guess we're up to the informational items too from commissioners and staff.
I can jump in if there's not commissioner discussion, but I'll give you a moment. Seems quiet. You can, I'll jump into mine, and then if commissioners have things, thanks. So really good news on Boulder Point and Woodland Drive traffic calming projects. Those we tried to bid late last construction season with the job order contracting method, and they came in way over budget. We put those out for a traditional bid and received bids, and we have one. Our lowest bid is actually under budget slightly, and that will be going to council for contract award, I believe 2 weeks from yesterday. So 2 weeks out roughly, we'll be going to award that contract. So that's great news. Once we get closer to that award, we'll work with the contractor. We'll really get busy working with the contractor on schedule, but we're only at the beginning of April. So this, we anticipate will be done this summer. So that's really good news.
Awesome. I have a question. You had mentioned the possibility of replacing some of the barriers that had been vandalized. With this coming up, is there a plan to do anything, or construction will start and that'll slow things down pretty well as it is?
We had, we had requested Public Works to put the barriers back up. Apparently there was vandalism. I thought they were going to try to piece it together and get it back up, but I did hear David and I heard from a resident earlier this week that had not been done. probably if we're construction like a month away, we'll probably won't put the effort into getting all that put back together. So we're kind of in a wait and see at this point. That's what we let the neighbors know. Let's see, smoke rise, signal rebuild. I think we've talked about this one just a little bit, but we have a number of deficiencies out at smoke rise. I think we have some movements that will likely benefit from green arrows, protected left turn phasing. We've got some alignment issues with those left turn lanes. We're missing signal heads, mast arms. The ADA ramp situation's horrible. Push buttons you can't even get to. So there's just a number of issues out there. So we put out a request for proposals to a number of engineering companies and received 4 proposals. Just I think the last one just came in, so we've got them all wrapped in as of I think yesterday. So we'll review those and get started on that design this year. I don't know if we'll be quick enough to try to get this constructed still this construction season, but the funding for construction becomes available July 1st. So if we can get the design done quick enough, we potentially could do it still this season. So that would be a really nice upgrade over on the far east, northeast side of town. Fremont asphalt art is moving forward. I don't have the date top of my mind. It's in May for this installation, and I know Metroplan is working on this heavily. David Lemke and the transportation group's working on it quite a bit, and I know Public Works has now gotten involved as well with some donated labor and materials. So we'll make sure you get an email about that when that officially has a date and time and all that stuff, but it's next month, so it's pretty good. We're getting there. The next 2 items were on City Council last night, the speed limit changes on Butler and the engineering standard amendments. Both of those were first reads of their ordinance last night and both passed. So they will come back again to council, I think in 2 weeks on the 16th, and then they have like a 30-day waiting period after that second read, and then those will become official. So those are moving along. And then I think Martin is on the line, and he was going to speak to first mile, last mile a little bit. So I'll pause and see if he jumps in.
I can jump in.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Members of the commission. So we first mile, last mile is a federal transit grant that was obtained by Mountain Line. They're working with the city. We have identified a handful of pedestrian and bicycle projects that both were identified as deficiencies in our networks and help enhance transit or access to transit. And that's really what first mile, last mile refers to, is if you are taking the bus, how you get to the bus and how you get from the bus to your destination at the end of the ride are important considerations, and we're trying to close those gaps. Our projects generally can fall into 3 different categories. 1 is missing sidewalks, 2 is enhanced crossings, and 3 is bikeways. And the bikeway category really just includes paint rather than anything that's getting construction. So changes to striping configurations, for example. We have, just to describe where we are in the process, we went through an initial kind of shakeout of projects through a 5% or 15% concept planning exercise to see what projects were feasible, what fit in the right of way, that sort of thing. Shortly after that, we engaged what's called a construction manager at risk. So in essence, we brought on board the company that's going to do the construction, and the earlier they are involved in the process, the more they can kind of contribute with suggestions about what's the most efficient way to construct these things. So they're on board. It is Kinney Construction Services, and they're taking part in our meetings now. Recently, we received a series of 60% plans from the designer. So the design is progressing. These have a little bit more detail on them. They include more information. We're in the process of reviewing them. This is kind of another shakeout. We'll make sure that all the projects we have on the list are buildable, and we'll go as a next step to 100% designs. I think looking forward, I don't know that we'll construct any projects this summer. There's a possibility of some, but we're targeting the summer after for construction, and probably all the projects will be divided into over 2 construction seasons. So next summer and the summer after that. And I think that's it. I apologize if we've been through this information before and I'm repeating, but think of it as a reminder. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Looks like you get off easy, Martin.
Looks like it. Thank you.
Last call for commissioner discussion, and then I guess we're almost there.
Hey, Jeff, could you just remind me what the proposed Butler speed limit changes were?
Yeah, let's see. The city council kind of went a little different than what we had been discussing. So the speed limit is going from Milton to Lone Tree previously was 35 and will now be 30. From Lone Tree to Sawmill previously was 40 and will now be 30. And from Sawmill to Ponderosa Parkway, which we never discussed or studied, will now be 35. So quite a few changes kind of last minute at the council meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And with that, Mr. Chair, we're on to the next meeting, which is June 5th, and we tentatively have these two items to look forward to.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to it. Okay. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Great. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks.